So part 2 picks off soon after where part 1 ended, seeing Paul kill Jamis to be accepted within the Fremen tribe, and Paul and his mother Lady Jessica beginning to make their way to Sietch Tabr with Stilgar and the Fremen. Unlike part 1, which began with a quote from Zendaya's Chani, part 2 begins with a quote from Florence Pugh's Princess Irulan, which is typically how each chapter opens in Frank Herbert's book. Irulan's opening narration begins by highlighting the surprise of the Atreides massacre and gives us our first look at the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, played by the iconic Christopher Walken. This idea of surprise is quickly turned on its head though, as Irulan details how her father is driven by power and that it's not the first time that the Harkonnens have done his dirty work. During the opening montage, we see Stellan Skarsgård's Baron Harkonnen putting Dave Bautista's Glossu Raban in control of their resumed spice production on Arrakis. However, what the Emperor and his daughter don't know is that the Fremen are seemingly growing stronger. And this is where we return to Paul, Jessica and the Fremen, who unlike in the novel, face early struggles on their journey to the Sietch. We begin with Paul, who is seen communicating with his unborn sister Alia Atreides in fetus form, telling her that their father is dead, that she should go be with him, and that he won't have enough time to fix things before she is born. So instantly we are informed that this version of Paul's sister is going to be different from what we got in the book. But Denis still maintains the weirdness of her character because, like in the book, at such a young age she can communicate like an adult. There is more to come with Alia as the movie progresses, and later on we see a hint of the future while teasing the events of the next book, Dune Messiah. But anyway, after Paul finishes talking to his unborn sister, he opens his eyes to the harsh orange sands during a planetary eclipse. We learn quickly that he and the Fremen have to survive a potential attack by nearby Harkonnen troops. Using Jamis's body and Thumpers as distractions, they force the Harkonnens to levitate above nearby rocks, and then once up there, the Fremen take them out one by one using their lasguns from a distance. Paul and his mother have to deal with 2 of the remaining Harkonnens who dropped back down to the surface, and once dealt with, the Fremen begin to extract all the water from their dead bodies. Jessica becomes sick watching this, and Stilgar tries to stop her because in traditional Fremen values, they cannot waste their bodies' water. A worm is called to then come and get the waterless Harkonnen bodies, and from here, they undergo the last part of their trip to Sietch Tabr. Before we get to their arrival though, we cut to a brief scene with Raban, who has been informed that he should bring the Harkonnen troops out of Fremen territories as they are losing too much men in those regions. Raban replies to his man saying that they are losing men to rats, and that phrase of course becomes a recurring description by the Harkonnens towards the Fremen throughout the film. Raban wants control of the whole planet but is told that the south is uninhabitable, and with that he lashes out against his own man, showing the stark difference between how each side treats their own. We then get to Sietch Tabr, and just like the book, we learn just how precious water is to the Fremen, but also how in this particular film adaptation, Denis Villeneuve has highlighted the idea of dispute within the tribe. When they arrive, half of the Fremen believe that Paul is the prophesized Lisan al-Gaib, while the other half don't believe in that and think he and his mother might be spies. Stilgar tries to get the council to have faith after describing to them what happened to Jamis, and that Paul already knows a bit of their customs, but struggles to get anyone to believe. Paul also tells his mother that this is her doing because the Bene Gesserit have fueled this story, but he does lean into that a bit, saying that they must try and sway the non-believers so that they can survive, and also begin to use the Fremen to disrupt spice production for the Harkonnens. Essentially, the process of gaining ground on their enemy so that Paul can begin to get revenge for his father and the Atreides' demise. We then come to learn more about the importance of water, with the water of Jameis's body extracted and his water added to an entire lake in the cave. Denis altered this moment from the book so that a scene between Stilgar and Jessica would not just explain the importance of these lakes, but also smoothly transition us into the water of life sequence, which if you've read the book, you'll know is a game-changing moment. At the lake, Jessica learns from Stilgar that this is one of thousands of water caches carefully created by the Fremen to help terraform the planet. Stilgar says that they have calculated exactly how much water they need, and once they get there, they will change the face of Arrakis and bring back a great paradise. Liet Kynes, who isn't mentioned as being Chani's parent in this adaptation, was one who helped imbue the Fremen with the ultimate dream of making Arrakis a garden world. And Stilgar and half of the Fremen believe that the Lisan al-Gaib could make this dream a reality. It's seen in this moment that once Stilgar explains the importance of the lake and Jessica sheds a tear, just like she was told off before for being sick, Stilgar doesn't let her waste this water. Instead, he drinks it and says that she shouldn't give her water away, not even for the dead. And this is where Jessica learns about what she must do surrounding that iconic Water of Life moment from the book. She knows the prophecies but learns that their Reverend Mother is dying, meaning that she must become the new Reverend Mother or the Fremen will have to kill her and take her water. Reverend Mothers are tasked with holding all the memories of the Reverend Mothers that came before, spanning countless generations. So Jessica makes her way to a cavern to undergo that ritual, but before it begins, there are a few things we learn outside with Paul as he starts to discover why the other half of the Fremen don't align their beliefs with him potentially being the Lisan al-Gaib. Chani's friend Shishakli, a character that has been expanded upon from the book, tells Paul that the Southern Fremen believe that a Messiah or outsider will come and lead them to paradise, but that the rest of them believe strictly in Fremen. Stilgar and the Southern Fremen who believe in that prophecy begin to pray right next to them, and this signals that the Water of Life ceremony has begun. Inside the cavern, Jessica encounters a frail woman known as the Fremen Reverend Mother Romalo and is shown the blue Water of Life poison. She's told that the poison frees the soul and that if she drinks it, she'll die, but she'll also see. Jessica is shaken by this, but on voice command by the old Reverend Mother, she takes a sip and the process begins. It starts with her being in agony, moving her arms and body around like some kind of contortionist, but after a small amount of time, she suddenly finds herself in a suspended state. As described in the book, she's able to meticulously examine the molecule structure of the drug, manipulating it and creating a catalyst that neutralizes the poison within the water. Once she does so, we see the blue liquid spreading inside of her, including all around Alia in the womb. Her eyes also turn blue, and she now possesses the complete life experiences of the chain of Reverend Mothers that extends far back in time. She is aware of her new status as a Reverend Mother, a process similar to that of the Bene Gesserit order. During the end of the memory sharing ritual, the dying Reverend Mother is surprised to discover Jessica's pregnancy, and this poses a problem because the unborn child has unintentionally absorbed the memories of the old Reverend Mother along with Jessica. The old Reverend Mother dies soon after, and Jessica is outside the cavern in her suspended state. Chani, Shishakli and the Southern Fremen argue over the prophecy outside, and Paul claims that she's right, that this was no miracle. He claims that his mother was trained to survive it, and that poison transportation is something that only advanced Bene Gesserit can do, and not the Mahdi that half of the Fremen believe in. Paul tells them that he's not here to lead, and that he wants to fight beside them, regardless of their beliefs. But Jessica soon awakens from her Water of Life experience, and we get a scene between her and Paul where she tells him that Alia now speaks to her, is frightened by what happened, that she believes in her brother, that the Kwisatz Haderach will show the way, and that only one step remains for him to become that. She tells him that he must do what she did and drink the Water of Life so that he can see the way forwards. We do come to that a bit later on in the film, but one thing that follows this that I do like is that the film shows the beginning of Paul's learning under Stilgar and the Fremen themselves. The 2-year time skip in the book after the Water of Life sequence misses a lot of that out, and while the Mahdi is known to be familiar with their ways because of his prescience, it's good to see a little bit of that understanding before we get to what follows with Paul's final test. It's also in this scene that we get Chani telling Shishakli nearby that she believes Paul is sincere, and regardless of not believing in the Southern Prophecy, she is beginning to fall for him because of that sincerity. After teaching him to sandwalk properly, we begin to see their relationship grow on screen. We also return to Jessica at the Sietch, and she's in the middle of talking to Alia in her womb. She says to Alia that she's right for wanting to protect Paul by making all the Fremen believe in the prophecy, and Jessica follows this up in quite an unsettling way by saying that they must convert the non-believers one by one, starting with the weaker ones. So again, we get an idea of the power that the Bene Gesserit have in manipulating and bringing people around to the stories they've set in motion. Moving on, we do come back to Paul, Chani and the Fremen during a gloriously shot action scene, which gives us a good example of how their side goes about stopping the efforts of Harkonnen spice harvesting. Using guerrilla tactics and weaponry, they take down the Harkonnens on site and destroy the harvester itself using lasguns. We see that Paul has begun to improve his fighting skills, applying things he learnt from his old trainers as well. Also, as signalled before, he and Chani have begun to truly fall in love. During a tent scene, he tells the Fremen that they should go further north to fight, and even if they die, the others will keep fighting for the belief that they can defeat their oppressors. During this, Shishakli is one who starts to come around on Paul and says that he deserves to be a Fedaykin, which if you've read the book, you'll know that these are the Fremen's guerrilla fighters who later become Muad'Dib's personal guard or death commandos. A lot of the Fremen in the camp agree that he deserves a Fremen name as well, which turns out to be Usul, meaning the base of the pillar, and Paul decides that his Fedaykin war name should be Paul Muad'Dib. The Fremen celebrate this, and you can tell that Chani is happy that he is now Usul and one of the people. But you can also tell that she still has uncertainty in the prophecy, unlike the other Fremen. She believes in Paul and loves him intimately, but the Bene Gesserit spread prophecy is one she cannot assign to because of her shared beliefs. We get moments between them that follow this on the stunning frames of desert dunes, and her dialogue here is exactly what she said during the opening of Dune Part 1. During the intimate moment, Paul tells her about his planet, the water there, and somewhat dreaming of Arrakis having that in the future. Chani also tells him that her Fremen name, which is Sahaya, means desert spring. Just like her other beliefs, she hates the name because it's from an assigned prophecy. And this loving moment marks the end of that current section of the book, because in the moments after, there is quite a lengthy time skip. In the book, 2 years have passed, Paul's been trained by Stilgar, and we learn the strangeness of Alia. In the film though, the time skip is only a couple of months long, and the montage that we get on screen covers the development of Paul's skills, his romance with Chani, and shots of the Fremen destroying more of the Harkonnen spice harvesters. The big things it doesn't cover from the book is both the birth of Alia into quite an unusual child, and the birth of Paul and Chani's child too. That child, known as Leto II, has been completely removed from the film to better the pacing and focus of this second part. And in the book, their child gets killed right before the final battle. But as we get to that point in the story later on, I'll describe how they changed to that particular moment, and specifically what they replaced it with. But yes, after that much shorter time skip, the story starts to move into some other important moments from the book with both the Harkonnens and the Fremen. We return to the Harkonnens at the Arrakeen residency, where Rabban visits his uncle and is seemingly getting worried about the disruption to their harvesting efforts. The Baron tells him that if they fail on his watch, the Emperor will take spice out of their control. He tells Rabban to tighten his grip or otherwise he'll be punished. And then when we come back to Paul after that previously mentioned time skip, we get an idea of his troubles in the time since. Paul has been enhanced by the spice and has been struggling to distinguish between his visions of the future and his memories. He had remembered before that a vision had shown him retrieving his father's skull and placing it in a Fremen rock mound as a sacred tribute. However, the visions he's having now have begun to turn a lot more destructive, and he's uncertain whether these events have already occurred or are yet to happen. Fremen. In one of them, he's following a woman as many individuals around her bow down, and we later find out that this is in fact Lady Jessica. By following her, it's a metaphor for him following his mother into a holy war, a war where billions die in his name. Chani tries to comfort him after awaking from such vision and worries for him too, because on that very same day he must prepare for a significant Fremen ritual known as the Rite of Passage, and this passage is where he must summon and learn to ride a sandworm. Stilgar takes charge of Paul's trial, wishes him some wise words of being direct, and then the proceedings commence. Paul is aware that he can utilize a thumper to summon the sandworm and then employ specialized maker hooks to climb aboard and control it. And as he activates the thumper, a colossal worm approaches, surpassing any size that Stilgar has ever witnessed or heard of before. Once managing to get on board, Paul skillfully uses his hooks to ascend onto the massive sandworm, and by manipulating them, he exposes a section of the worm's vulnerable innards. Paul understands that the worm will protect this exposed area from the abrasive sand, enabling him to remain on top. It's ultimately a triumph, and Chani sees that Stilgar, the believers, and all the Fremen there are cheering him on, embracing the prophecy that is coming alive right before them. Back at the Sietch, Jessica receives word that Paul has passed, and she tells the Fremen to begin sharing the word around that he is the true Mahdi. She then tells Alia that their task in the north is nearly complete, that the Fremen believe in Paul, and that now her journey must turn to the south. Paul doesn't go with her and decides to stay in the north, expressing to her his concerns about the path they are currently on. And this is partially because Paul thinks his mother is bringing about the holy war that he's been seeing in his visions. Soon after, the Fremen attack a spice depot near Arrakis, and it forces Rabban in person to travel to the affected base and try to deal with Muad'Dib himself. Once he gets there, he sees in person the tactical and physical strength of the Fremen and is soon forced to evacuate the area. We then cut to planet Kaitane, the home planet of Christopher Walken's Emperor, and we begin to get his reaction to the rising issues the Fremen are causing for the Harkonnens on Arrakis. In conversation with his daughter, the Princess Irulan, she tells him that using force against a religious figure of this magnitude will only make them stronger, and that he could eventually go to Arrakis after a supposed war and bring peace himself. He recognizes her strength as a potential empress, but thinks that force should be used before things start to get out of control. Then in private, Irulan speaks to the Reverend Mother we saw in part 1, known as Helen Mohiam, telling her that this is all the Bene Gesserit's doing, and wonders whether Muad'Dib is actually Paul Atreides. The Reverend Mother snaps in response, making her aware that it is indeed Paul, and that her father shouldn't know the truth about it. That's because if the Great Houses find out about the massacre of the Atreides, her father could eventually lose the throne. Irulan asks what hope there is if this is the truth, and the Reverend Mother reminds her of the plans within plans, as they have another potential Chosen One prospect in Phaedra Harkonnen. The question is, unlike Paul, can they control him? And that's where, after an hour of screen time, we finally come to the introduction of Austin Butler's Feyd-Rautha. We visit the Harkonnen homeworld Gedi Prime on the occasion of Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen's 17th birthday, and quite quickly we are struck by how different the planet looks. It's devoid of colour during the daytime because of the black sun orbiting the planet, yet scenes set inside do feature glimmers of colour. Before Feyd takes part in his birthday fight, his blade is sharpened and 2 of his 3 contestants are then poisoned. On the other side of this, the third opponent he's set to face learnt to be an Atreides soldier who was seen during Duke Leto's arrival on Arrakis is not poisoned. We learn later on that this is because the Baron wants the audience in the arena to see how strong Feyd is and how he doesn't need manipulations to gain their support. In the book, this is actually Feyd and Furfir Hawat's doing to enhance his victory, but because Hawat's character is completely removed from the second film, Villeneuve chose this route instead. When we do reach the fight, Baron Harkonnen is in attendance, as well as Leia Sedu's Lady Margot Fenring, who is there on behalf of the Bene Gesserit Order to see whether he is that potential prospect that we talked about before. With a lot of Harkonnens cheering all around the arena, Feyd-Rautha engages in combat with the slave gladiators, and the poisoned ones are quickly killed. But the Atreides soldier that wasn't poisoned stands out, as he he displays remarkable agility and strength. Feyd takes off his bod shield during the fight to make the victory even more impressive, and despite the remaining gladiators' relentless attacks, Feyd does eventually manage to kill him. The crowd is captivated by his performance, applauding his skill and bravery, and Lady Margot Fenring in the audience is impressed as well. Sometime after the fight, Feyd visits the Baron and makes threats to his life after he didn't poison that third gladiator. In the book, he actually tries to kill the Baron, so while we didn't get that here, we still see the aggression of Feyd and his desire to become a forceful leader. Essentially, he's a more twisted and brutal take on the very idea of Paul Atreides. Anyway, the Baron offers to give him Arrakis, seeing him as a potential heir, and makes it clear to him as well that Raban is currently failing. The Baron intends to allow Raban to suppress the indigenous population until tensions escalate, and then subsequently, he plans to replace Raban with Feyd and make him emperor. This is because he knows of how the emperor ordered the attack against the Atreides and sees the possibility of the great houses turning against him. We are then led into the last scene on Gedi Prime, where Lady Fenring puts her plan in action to seduce Feyd and bear his child. She aims to preserve his bloodline in order of the court, as the Bene Gesserit speculate that Feyd has the potential to become even more ruthless than his uncle. In the scene, Lady Fenring uses the voice on Feyd, learns that he has had dreams of her, and another thing that also reminds us of Paul from the first film is that he's also put through that dreaded Gom Jabbar test. In a scene that follows with Helen Mohiam back on Kaitane, supposedly one that is a bit into the future, Lady Fenring tells her that the bloodline is now secured, and that's because she is pregnant with Feyd's child. She informs the Reverend Mother that he can be controlled because he's sexually vulnerable. This brings us back to Arrakis, where we get the return of our favourite Baliset playing Gurney Halleck. He only plays out a small tune at the beginning of his reintroduction, which is a shame, but at least we did get him playing the Baliset in this adaptation. Gurney is now leading a band of smugglers who are harvesting spice using a beat-down crawler. Just like in the book, Paul, Stilgar and the other Fremen surprise them and utilise rockets to obliterate their equipment. Gurney is taken aback because Paul reveals himself, and of course he believed that Paul had been killed in the first film's attack. So in a heartfelt moment, Paul and Gurney embrace each other, his men surrender to the Fremen, and after a bit of convincing from Paul, the Fremen allow them to join their current quest. Gurney tells Paul that he should use his power to control the Fremen, but he makes it clear to him that he is scared of doing so because his visions lead to a holy war. He doesn't want to go south because of that vision coming true, and in turn, Gurney reveals to him that the Atreides had firepower hidden in the desert. That very firepower is the stockpile of family atomics. As this information is revealed, Paul begins to change, realizing that wielding this power can lead the Fremen to victory, and Chani displays that she doesn't trust this use of power. Paul tells her that he's doing all of this for the Fremen and that his allegiance will stay with her. But again, as we reach the ending part of this adaptation, we start to see how this becomes a bit of a difference from the book, as Chani doesn't like the idea of following an outsider or her lover into a war of this scale. Back on planet Kaitane, Irulan gathers word that a new Reverend Mother is spreading belief in the south of Arrakis about the arrival of the Lisan al-Gaib, and that Muad'Dib is causing problems for spice production in the north. While Jessica is that first person in question in the south, she learns about how the water of life is created, drowning a young sandworm in water and then extracting the poison. Jessica uses the voice on the Fremen woman who extracted it so that she will allow Paul to drink the water of life when he does eventually come south, and thus the Kwisatz Haderach will be born. We cut back to Paul as he awakens from a vision of Chani watching the destruction of Sietch Tabr in the distance before dying in his arms afterwards. That same destruction on Sietch Tabr then happens in real time, and having just been scarred by the vision of Chani dying in his arms, it makes him more worried that going south will kill them all. Like I said previously, in the book, this moment is the replacement for the death of Paul and Chani's child. However, in the film, we see that this has been replaced by a large-scale attack on the north and Sietch Tabr, which includes the death of countless Fremen, including Chani's friend Shishakli. So this is what's used as the last nail of revenge against House Harkonnen instead of that other death described in the book. After that mentioned attack, Paul and Chani take an injured Stilgar and the surviving Fremen from Tabr into their protection, and they are informed that they need to make the journey south to attend a war council. But before doing so, Stilgar and the Fremen begin to put pressure on Paul into challenging Stilgar for the leadership. Stilgar is aware of the pressure weighing on Paul, but he can't see no alternative to determine Paul's succession other than through a fight between them. Paul acknowledges that he would emerge victorious in such a confrontation and strives to avoid that conflict. He feels the growing strength of the future jihad in his name, and he thinks that there is no way to stop it. However, after Chani tries to convince him to go south, and after he has a vision of Jamis telling him that he needs to drink the water of life to see the way, he does eventually decide to go with them. And on the other side of things, Feyd-Rautha and the Harkonnens believe that they have gone south to hide and that they can now resume spice harvesting at will. Once in the south, Paul takes the water of life, managing to alter a single drop of it, similar to the abilities of the Reverend Mothers. This allows him to drink the water and greatly enhance his prescient powers. And as the Kwisatz Haderach, Paul can see into places that are inaccessible to the female Reverend Mothers, including both the future and the present. He sees into the future and is spoken to by an older version of his sister Alia Atreides, played in a cameo role by Anya Taylor-Joy. And while overlooking oceans of water on Arrakis, she tells him that he will now learn the truth about their family. During this time, Chani is summoned by Lady Jessica to visit Paul, but is unaware that he had taken the water and is now unconscious. His life signs are barely detectable, and the Fedaykin outside have been concealing his condition, believing that he's in a sacred trance in preparation for leading them into battle. Chani realizes that Paul has attempted to consume the water of life, and when she is angered by that, Jessica uses the voice on her to make her help him. Part of the prophecy that Stilgar reads out while this happens is that the Lisan al-Gaib will return from the dead using Desert Spring Tears, which, as mentioned before, is Chani's Fremen name. So under voice control, Chani combines her tear with a small amount of the water of life, touches his lips, and in an instant he awakens. Chani is angered by what he did, and once Paul talks to Jessica in a vision, he tells her that eventually she'll come to understand because he's seen it in the future. Paul's attitude changes because he now has future sight. After consuming the water of life, his ability to perceive the past and future became significantly enhanced. He gained the extraordinary vision to foresee all potential outcomes, yet only one future path emerged where their survival was assured. And the Bene Gesserit's planted story was a narrative that the Order had diligently strived to manifest across generations. It was not limited to Arrakis, and their intention was not specifically focused on Paul. Rather, their objective was to shape a Messiah or a comparable figure whom they could control. Both Paul and Feyd were intended to serve as pivotal elements in this creation, but as we see later on, things fall outside of their control. Continuing with his vision, Paul tells his mother that he can see potential futures and a narrow way through for Fremen victory. He also reveals to her that he saw their bloodline and that Jessica is in fact the daughter of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. He tells her that they will survive by acting like Harkonnens, and thus the dark stage of Paul's path begins. So Paul arrives at the War Council in the south with all of the gathered Fremen and is due to make a speech about the way forward. He takes control of the Fremen by persuading them that there is no need to eliminate Stilgar, emphasizing the importance of keeping good fighters alive and posing to them the question, do you destroy a weapon before a battle? Paul leverages the Fremen's religious beliefs, portraying himself as their ruthless prophet by demonstrating that he can see into the past and see everything that happens to certain Fremen individuals there. The Fremen acknowledge his prescience by bowing to him. He puts on his father's ducal ring and yells that he will take them to the Green Paradise. And with Stilgar supporting this, the Fremen unite with him in chanting Lisan al-Gaib in acknowledgement acknowledgement of his rise to authority. So with most of the Fremen army now on his side, Paul decides to take action. He first sends a marked message to the Emperor on planet Kytane saying that he is still alive and that he is challenging him for the throne. After they read this message, the Reverend Mother Helen Mohiam tells Irulan that her father will lose the throne no matter who prevails, but that there is one way her family can remain in power, and that is through marrying the victor of this war. So that finally brings us to the Battle of Arrakis, and we see Paul, Chani and the Fremen in the midst of heading north to fight the arising war. Chani says to Jessica that she is joining the fight because she is fighting specifically for her people, and as we learn in the closing moments of the film, the events that take place begin to form a rift between her and Paul. Just before the battle begins, Paul, Stilgar, Gurney and the Fremen observe the city of Arrakis from a distance, making preparations for their imminent attack. They witness the arrival of the Emperor on Arrakis, accompanied by 5 legions of Sardaukar, and knowing that a storm is approaching the city, they anticipate that it will disable the shields protecting the enemy's position. Meanwhile, the Baron and Fade are shocked to see that the Emperor has arrived, and the Baron orders a message to be sent to the great houses above, telling them that they are under attack from the Emperor's Sardaukar. He then meets with the Emperor, Princess Irulan, and Reverend Mother Mohiam, and while seated on an elaborate throne, the Emperor inquires about the Baron's knowledge of Muad'Dib's true identity. The Baron speculates that Muad'Dib is simply a religious zealot, and Walken's character cannot believe that he hasn't scanned the south yet, or that he doesn't know that Muad'Dib is actually Paul Atreides. A powerful rumbling then shakes the room, signalling that the Fremen have begun their attack. Paul and the Fremen use the Atreides atomics on the shield wall, creating fear among the Sardaukar and Harkonnen troops, and in turn, it deactivates their shields. As the storm descends, the Fremen launch their ground attack, and we witness them riding sandworms into battle. Although the Sardaukar are fierce, with the Fremen hitting them on all sides, it becomes quite a quick fight, but one that is still absolutely stunning to see unfold on screen. And during that battle, we see that Gurney also gets personal revenge against Raban. This all leads to a triumphant Paul striding into the Imperial tent, revealing to the Baron that he is his grandfather, and then in brutal fashion executing him in front of the Emperor and everyone else in the room. He orders the Fremen with him to kill the Sardaukar there, bring the Emperor and the others to the residency, and then drop the Baron's body in the desert. So now, coming to the end of Dune Part 2, we get to see the aftermath of Paul's attack on the Emperor's forces and the full extent of Paul's visions of the future. With every character assembled in the residency, Paul learns from the Emperor that the great houses are above them in space, waiting to attack. Paul questions whether they are here for him, and that he thinks they'd be curious to hear his side of the story and how his family were massacred on the Emperor's orders. He gets Gurney to send a warning to the ships above, saying that if they don't honour his ascendancy and attack him, their atomics will obliterate the spice fields. And in turn, this means the end of spice production and therefore interplanetary travel. Subsequently, Paul silences the Reverend Mother Mohiam and makes her recognise that he is indeed the Kwisatz Haderach, the individual the Bene Gesserit have strived to breed for generations. She also realises that this highly sought after person is completely beyond her control. Paul proposes to the Emperor that their solution to their predicament lies in his marriage to Princess Irulan and his subsequent ascension to the Imperial throne. This stuns Chani, who he told just moments prior that he would never leave her side, and the Emperor replies with insults, which includes calling his father a weak man. So initially, he rejects that proposal. Instead of things going along this smoothly, Paul must fight to the death in a knife fight with the Emperor's chosen champion, Fade Rother. Gurney asks Paul's permission to fight Fade in order to seek revenge against the Harkonnens, but Fade interrupts by invoking the rules of Canley against Paul, meaning that Paul has to face Fade in combat himself. Although Paul could have found a way to avoid this challenge, he impulsively agrees in a moment of reckless abandon. He realises that there is no longer any escape from the Holy War, during which the Fremen will spread chaos throughout the universe. And even in death, he will become a martyr who inspires his people in their jihad. So he once again feels the weight of his daunting purpose and decides to engage in the duel against Fade. He welcomes his cousin, and Fade replies that Paul wouldn't be the first relative he has killed, referring to when earlier in the movie we learn that he killed his own mother. But after short playing introductions, the well-choreographed fight begins. Fade mocks him throughout their fight, suggesting that he'll make Chani his pet, and Paul also gets stabbed twice in the process. But eventually, Paul uses his fragility to his advantage, making Fade believe that he was almost defeated. And upon Paul's successful killing of Fade Rotha, the Emperor, left with no alternative, is compelled to accept Paul's proposal and permit Princess Irulan to marry him. After this, Gurney comes back with the disappointing news that the Great Houses refuse to acknowledge his authority, and this prompts Paul to give a command to his Fremen army, instructing them to send them to paradise. Paul's harsh decision to initiate conflict against the Great Houses, who reject his claim to the throne, showcases the depth of his transformation. By rallying the Fremen to partake in a brutal crusade on his behalf, Paul is fulfilling the prophecy unveiled in his visions, a prophecy that predicted widespread devastation throughout the galaxy. Following his ingestion of the Water of Life, Paul's dedication to achieving triumph through the narrow path has intensified his desire to seize control of the Empire. So despite the losses suffered by the Fremen, Paul remains steadfast in his quest for power. Now, there is a slight deviation from the book, because in the film adaptation, Paul is portrayed as embracing the Fremen's participation in their violent holy war. In the books, this holy war occurs between the events of Dune and Dune Messiah, and it seems that the movie adheres to this timeline as well. As a result, the conclusion of the film closely mirrors that of the next book, conveying the idea that Paul emerges victorious but at a significant price. But in comparison to the first book, there are clear changes, and I will be going deeper into some of those things, especially surrounding the ending, in an upcoming video. For now though, how does this lead us into the final moment of the film? Well, at the very end, we see that Chani leaves Paul's side and embarks on a solitary journey into the expansive desert by calling a sandworm. She demonstrates her preparedness to confront the forthcoming challenges head-on, and it becomes evident that for the time being, she is rejecting Paul's reckless pursuit of power. Earlier, Jessica expresses her empathy towards Paul, acknowledging her sympathy for him as Chani chooses to distance herself. This decision is a result of Paul's action to embrace a path of religious extremism which strongly contradicts Chani's beliefs. However, in a poignant moment, Paul assures his mother by stating she'll come to understand. This statement alludes to the future events portrayed in Dune Messiah, the second novel by Frank Herbert, which unfolds many years later. And with the Fremen heading up in ships to start their holy war against the Great Houses, there's much interrogation to come in the next film surrounding the idea of forceful messiahs. And news on Denis Villeneuve's Dune universe, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like, rating, and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.